And good afternoon from Philadelphia. Frank here with yet another edition of UFO News Network Sunday on a Sunday, believe it or not. And we're ready to go. Let's not beat around the bush. We've got one of our patented roundtables together for you. Got a real all-star lineup, so let me bring in Chant to do the formal intros. What's going on there, Chant?
You know, I wanted to just talk a little bit about UFO Megacon first, and then get right into our fantastic show today. And that is Bob Brown and Lorraine Fenton, core producers of this interesting event. They had many speakers this year, and they had a message they wanted to share with everybody about it, and that is regarding their UFO Megacon, no speaker is invited unless they have new information to share. And their website goes on to say, as a ticket holder, you know, most of the career ufology speakers talk about the same thing repeatedly, and then you see them year after year. And they said they just want to be different in the respect that they have speakers with new material. And so this year, I actually had the opportunity to ask Shane Hurd, who's a field investigator with Phoenix MUFON, how he felt about the event. He actually went there with a good friend of his. And Shane, how are you doing today?
Yeah, doing quite well. How about you guys?
Great. Wanted to ask you about the UFO Megacon event. Who did you see there, and how did it go?
Yeah, we were only able to go for a couple of the days, Friday and Saturday, came back home on Sunday. So we caught a few of the presentations, and then we were able to spend a lot of time kind of mingling around with some old friends and making new friends, and it was a really great time that way. A couple of talks that we saw were two of the speakers that we caught on Saturday. One was Kevin Day, who was speaking on the Nimitz case, and he was accompanied by Gary Voorhees, and both of those guys were key radar operators during that event. And they had a really great presentation in terms of what was different was they really showed the emotional impact that this had on them for many years, and it was negative for them, but now they are really seeing it as a positive. So that was kind of an interesting, take on it. And they also displayed the more recent movie by Dave Beatty, the animated movie about the event, which was really great and helps you visualize what that account is, because it is complex.
Now, Shane, did you hang around to watch the credits and see my name in the credits, by the way?
I did, Frank. I did. In fact, I stood up in the audience and went, woohoo.
Yeah, add a guy. I'd have done the same thing if I was there.
Yeah, we love Dave Beatty. After only 3 or 4 weeks of having had his U.S. Nimitz movie on Amazon, it had 1 million views. Do you remember that, Frank?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, I remember it.
Yeah, and there's also a friend of mine, Brian Jackson, who went to the UFO Megacon event, and he mentioned all the ATIP guys that were there. Can you tell us whether you actually saw them or not?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we in fact, we bumped into Kevin, Jason Turnier, Gary Voorhees, walked around the casino, and we kind of passed each other and weren't sure we recognized each other, because it's really just been on Facebook. But I noticed a name tag and it jumped out and I caught it. So we went over and introduced ourselves, and we had a drink and we talked all things ATIP and the Nimitz case, and then just in general, their experience with ufology, which is really quite new for them. So it was kind of cool to talk to someone who was just seeing this through a different set of eyes, had no knowledge or interest of ufology prior to, and now they've been just swept into this, head first. And so it was kind of cool to hear their perspective.
Lastly, and then I was going to bring on our guests and introduce them. I wanted to talk to you, Shane, about how when you first walked in, you actually saw George Knapp and Jeremy Corbell.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had a great time, hanging out and talking with those guys, and of course they also we also saw Richard Doty there as well with them and walking around, and it was an interesting experience, no doubt about it.
Did you get to actually see George Norrie there?
No, I did not see George Norrie.
Oh, I was just curious. Also, I know there was just a lot of easily recognizable people there. I was just curious if you saw anybody else that you wanted to mention here at all there at the event?
Oh yeah, it was an all-star lineup, no doubt about it. I think they had like 50 or 60 speakers. And as I mentioned, we came at the end of the 7-day event, but we bumped into a sweetheart of a guy, Peter Robbins. Just love Peter. He was a speaker at the event. Also Ray Schmansky, who wrote the book 50 Shades of Grays, and his experience at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is really fascinating stuff. And he's a good guy and has one heck of a sense of humor. So that was it was a great time we had, just sitting around and talking ufology and, shooting the ball. It was great.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to bring on our panel today. We have a special show on the intelligence community, the government, and ufology. And I just want to share a little bit about Shane Hurd, who you just heard talking there. He is an experienced MUFON field investigator with Phoenix MUFON. He's investigated over 50 cases, and regarding lights in the sky cases, abduction cases, hoaxes, unidentified flying objects. And Shane has also done some brief TV, radio, podcasts, and other writing experiences regarding the UFO phenomena. Moving on, we also have the wonderful Earl Gray. Everybody knows Earl Gray. He's the chief investigator for Southern California chapter of MUFON, and we're going to bring him in. And then also we have the venerated and wonderful Dr. Irena McCameron Scott, who is the great-great-grandniece of John Purdue. She has a PhD in physiology from the University of Missouri, was an assistant professor of biology at St. Bonaventure University. She has published works in biology and about Ohio history. And she was also on the board of MUFON directors in the 1990s through 2000, an investigator and consultant, and was an investigator for QFOS. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a question for you all. We had a very interesting speaker that showed up at UFO Megacon. I think it was Richard Doty. My understanding is he is a counterintelligence, a confirmed counterintelligence officer for the United States government. I think he's retired now.
But just to jump in, he worked for UFOS, the Air Force Office of Special Investigations.
Okay, thank you. And my understanding is he has done interviews with George Knapp and Linda Moulton Howe regarding his work in the field. I guess I had a little reservations about him having been at UFO Megacon. Shane, how do you feel about Richard Doty having been a speaker there?
Yeah, it was actually, that was one of the talks that we, made a point of seeing, and I was actually a little shocked that he's there, considering the fact that he is confirmed counterintelligence agent, and he has some pretty negative history with the Paul Benowitz case, for example. And he was making some statements and saying some things that I had not known or heard about, and it was very, very interesting. Let's say that.
Well, like what? What was he saying that you hadn't heard before?
Well, the one thing, he had a bullet-pointed presentation, and he kind of went through his story. And one of the things that he had, and it was, again, on the bullet-pointed presentation, was that he had worked for Hal Puthoff for 11 years. And I had never heard that, and I thought that was pretty shocking myself.
I'd be interested to hear what Hal has to say about that.
Yeah, I've not heard or seen anything on that yet. So, again, if it's true or not, I don't know. Again, this individual is his business is misinformation, disinformation. So I'm not sure there's a single thing there that, you could hang your hat on as being absolutely true. So, yeah, it would only be fair, I think, for these other people to, have an opportunity to comment on that.
I also was going to ask Earl Gray and Dr. Scott.
Well, one more question for Shane,
Go
since
ahead.
he did see the presentation. Did he blame the CIA for the Majestic 12 and Serpo material, like I've heard him do in the past?
He didn't really go there on that presentation. I think if I could summarize what the presentation was about, it was his explanation as to his role and how we should not hold that against him.
Okay. And did he talk at all about the disinformation he still continues to spread within the community, which I know for a fact about?
He did not.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, this was, like I said, this was it was a bit of a, it appeared to me, I don't know if that was the intention, but it appeared to me it was sort of a, an explanation as to, his role and behavior and why we should not hold that against him.
Got it.
Got it.
I was going to actually ask Earl Grey a question. If you had gone to UFO Megacon and you had seen a counterintelligence officer on the docket, on the ticket to speak, what would be your perspective regarding that, Earl?
Well, I kind of expect that. I've heard for years, that it's always a fun thing to do is to go to an event like that or the MUFON symposium or what have you, and try to figure out who the intelligence agents are that are out in the crowd. And so, and I don't know if there's such a thing as an intelligence agent. And I think that you have to keep it in perspective. You have to be circumspect and question what you hear from people, especially if they've had a background where they've sort of been called out as being disinformants from time to time. And Rick Doty definitely has a little history of people saying that he's, a disseminator of disinformation out there. And then that sometimes it's been in a governmental form, that he was doing what he was supposed to be doing. So I don't know. You have to be circumspect, but I don't think there's really any way for us to get around being observed and having disinformation thrown at us. And the thing about Rick Doty that's interesting is that, at least from what I've heard, and I think intelligence altogether, that they'll mix a little bit of the truth in with the lies, and it's sort of up to you to figure out what is what. So just because Richard Doty says something doesn't mean I'm just going to immediately discount it, but there certainly is a little red flag that goes up.
Right. You don't necessarily take
a lot of times what I've found in looking at material like MJ12 or Serpo is there are facts in there that are sort of placed in there to add credibility to the lies, if you get my meaning.
Yes. It was just with Serpo, we also, I don't know about you, when I read that, I was hoping it was true. And some of it sort of went along with what we'd heard about, the supposed landing at Holloman Base and that there was an exchange program, and of course now, I don't know if any of that story is true. Probably not. But,
I would say no. Yeah, I would bet against that.
I would bet against it as well. We wish it would be nice, but no, I don't think so.
I think it can be said with an air certainty that the U.S. government has been heavily involved in tracking certain interest groups throughout history. If it has to do anything with, like, from being pro-gun to the ufology community, all spectrum of different types of subjects. Any kind of group that is self-created, grassroots kind of organization, the U.S. government, even going back to like the 50s, probably before that, when unions were being created, they would show up to those kind of meetings to find out what's going on here. They would actually accumulate as much data and start a file on that. The Hoover era is famous for that. I wanted to ask you, because Earl brought up a great point about how he would not be surprised if there's intelligence agents showing up at these kind of gatherings. Do you think that they're still as actively involved now as they were back then? Anybody regarding the intelligence community being involved in showing up these kind of gatherings or conventions?
Well, I could say that, I was aware of the intelligence being involved with ufology. at least, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It's, it wasn't really terribly obvious of late, but now with some of the other revelations that, Rick Doty had mentioned, it appears that, in fact, they have always been part of ufology. And, and let me clarify, I'm not, anti-intelligence efforts for our country to, assure that we're safe and all of those things. And, that's very legitimate. But, infiltrating an organization and seeding disinformation, I think, is just a different level that causes one to have concern, right? Because you don't know if you're the subject of this or not. So,
yes,
that in that way, it's concerning.
And it's a waste of my money, a waste of my tax dollars.
Wanted to mention something and then ask Dr. Irena Scott a question. My understanding is there was a media outlet by the name of Fifth Estate that broke a story about MKultra in Canada at a certain mental hospital where they were actually experimenting on mental patients there. And it was the government getting involved in the lives of citizens, trying to gather data on them and how they might potentially be able to use them as assets later. I think after that story was broke, then the U.S. government put the thumb down on the CIA and said, you guys can no longer use your powers to investigate in the capacity you did before. You now have a limited capacity to investigate people. So then what the CIA did, and anybody can read this online, this is not difficult to do research on, they now have to use assets. They're called assets. They're not actual real direct employees, somebody within their department. They have to hire somebody out of the country in order to, or just outside their organization to find out more about people in our country. Dr. Scott, I was going to ask you a question. Have you ever had the opportunity to learn a little bit more about the government getting more involved with the field of ufology? Like Project Blue Book, for example, or any capacity? How do you feel about the government being involved in the area of ufology?
Well, my last book, I told a lot about Project Blue Book, and it was mainly about Battelle Memorial Institute and an investigation of what went on there when they worked for Project Blue Book. I had a number of Dr. Hynek's handwritten letters that sort of told what he was doing, what he was interested in. And I had worked for the government like the DIA, and it was my impression that high in the security that the government knows about UFOs. But although what I worked with should have been connected with UFOs, it wasn't. I was in air order of battle for a while with a real high security clearance where I was supposed to identify aircraft over a certain area. But we didn't have any information about in our security clearances about UFOs, even though we might have seen one.
You had access, being in the position you did, working for the government, to classified files. What does it mean to have classified material? What does that mean, top secret information, so the average person can understand that?
Well, at the time, we called it above top secret security clearances. And it's now called, it was called then too, sensitive compartmentalized information. And there's several types of it. It's above top secret. And there's specific code words that go for specific things you do, or that are like a keyhole where you open it up and you can get into certain things depending on your code word classification. And like mine was, it's declassified now, talent keyhole. I think it's called TK now. It's a very high clearance, and mine was for satellite photography and that sort of thing. But there's different types of it for different things.
I see. And then also, are you able to talk about how there's people close to you who work for the government as well, or did you want me to go ahead and move on to something else? Dr. Scott, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to ask you, are you in a position to talk about how there's people that were close to you in your life who actually worked for the government in certain capacities, or I can ask a different question if you wish.
Okay. I was just yesterday talking to a person called Jenny Zeidman, who had worked for Project Blue Book.
Okay.
She gave me a lot of information about that I used in my last book about it. But so far as I know, I don't know of anybody right now that I'm around working for the government.
Oh, yeah. No, I meant in the past. But yeah, there's actually interesting stories about counterintelligence agents having worked for Area 51, for example. What I was going to ask Shane and Earl and Dr. Scott, if they want to chime in, is how do you feel about a counterintelligence agent working at Area 51? My take on it is, my understanding is back in the 60s and 70s, if they were working there, it was to keep the Russians out. Going on that, what are your thoughts on that particular topic? Anyone?
Well, I'll take that one. My guess is a lot of these Air Force facilities, for example, they're located, not far from neighborhoods, right in communities all over the country. So if some sort of foreign intelligence was looking to get some information from those places, they sort of have to be, at least to an extent, involved in countering that. But the idea of taking the extra step to, spy on private organizations, look into and attend meetings of private organizations, that to me seems a little bit over the line, but that's me.
Yeah, and then I was also going to ask Shane or Earl or Dr. Scott, do you have any opinions on the government being involved in our lives now regarding the topic of ufology? For example, I guess there was some sort of form of disclosure a couple years ago when a certain article hit the internet about ATIP. It was a top secret Pentagon program that Lou Elizondo was involved in. And that gave us a little bit of insight regarding the possibility of their being involved in the topic of ufology. My opinion on that is the U.S. government has always been involved in the topic of ufology. They've never not been. Anything that could pose a threat to our skies, they would definitely want to know more about. Is there any opinion anybody has on that?
I mean, you
Go
first,
ahead.
Shane. After you.
To me, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, ufologists since 1969 have been saying, look, the U.S. government is not out of the UFO business. It would make no sense that they are. And I think it's legitimate, and it's not a shock. However, I think that announcement, identifying that program and the budget and all those things, was one of the biggest things to hit ufology in decades, and because it is confirmation that what ufologists have been saying for all these years was in fact true. So there was sort of a vindication that came with that, and I thought that was really good, and I thought it was important, and I think it suggests something. I'm not sure what it suggests, but the fact that has come out, that commitment was made, that revelation, is really a big deal.
Now, does anybody, let me jump in here, does anyone have any misgivings about the fact that the Through the Stars Academy, which seems like something of a private sector spinoff from the ATIP program with Lou Elizondo involved, a former intelligence officer, and the Vice President of Operations, Jim Semivan, being a former senior intelligence service member of the CIA. Does anyone have any misgivings about their effort as a result of the backgrounds of these two individuals?
I think they're coming from sort of that they're treating the phenomena as a threat, because that's where they came from when they were studying it for the government. So if there's any misgiving that I have about ATIP, that would probably be it, that I think that that they already have a conjecture in mind as to what is happening on our planet with our visitors and what their motivation for visiting us is. And they're seeing it as a threat. You know, I mean, it was a threat assessment group. And we know that they had this group because we've got the documents now, you know. I mean, I guess it came out with the WikiLeaks spill, but of course, you know, we know that John Podesta and Harry Reid and all these guys that were high-level government were involved in this, and that the government's at least interested in UFOs enough to throw $22 million at it in that particular instance.
And more on other programs that we have a vague idea about, but I don't doubt that they've been going on all along.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then too, you know, I think, Frank, not to get conspiratorial here, but even with you know, the TTSA and considering who's involved, I think you always have to have a measure of caution when it comes to the information, and that's simply because, I mean, you should anyway, but yes, these are intelligence folks, and again, they sort of appeared out of nowhere at a certain time in a certain place with certain information. I mean, I don't think any of this was, you know, by accident. It's contrived. There's thought behind it, effort behind it, and there's a goal, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, every organization has a goal, right? So, you know, is that goal and the intent clearly, you know, communicated to us? I don't know. But, you know, my feeling is, you know, time will tell. Let's observe not what's said, but the actions. And then,
yes,
and you can begin to formulate, you know, an opinion based on, you know, facts, not just an opinion or impression. So that's kind of what I'm a wait and see guy. Let's, you know, I'm hopeful. I'm really hopeful that, you know, that they're legit and that they bring forth, you know, really good information. Now, I think we all want that. And if I had millions of dollars at my disposal, I'd do the same thing. So and many of us would, right? So, you know, I'm very hopeful, but, you know, cautious.
Yeah, if you do look at the bottom line, one thing is they've gotten an awful lot of mileage off not that much gas. What they've really talked about is largely the Nimitz case, which has been backed up, I think, by enough independent witnesses who are now in the private sector that was a legit case. Robert Powell had a line on that case before these guys even came down the pike. And they're also talking about the metamaterials, which has been a thing in the UFO field for some time, again, going back a ways. They've got their samples they're testing. There's another effort headed up by Jacques Vallée and Gary Nolan. They've got their samples, and they're working on those. And that's really about all they've had. They've also had a couple of videos that we think were a result of an incident off the east coast of the U.S. in 2015. I think that's the Go Fast and the Gimbal video, I believe. Yeah, I get those confused sometimes. And that apparently was a very large and interesting case, not dissimilar to the Nimitz. But we don't, we also don't have, like, I think maybe a good dozen individuals coming forward regarding that Nimitz case. So that's a pretty huge case. And again, like you were saying, the proof is in the pudding. And what they've at least discussed openly in the last year and a half or so has proved out. So we'll see where it goes. Obviously, the thing is that I look at them and see is not a whole lot. And if Elizondo is running this organization for 5 years, then, you know, there had to be some cases. If you notice, they're not really discussing any cases that happened during the time that he was running the ATIP OSAP program. You know, I think that's a little weird. There had to be something coming across his desk in real time, I would think.
Good points, Frank. And one of the things that I think that illustrates is what is different about TTSA is well illustrated by the fact that, yes, that Nimitz case was out there before and no one knew about it. No one heard about it. But now with TTSA, it seems like their role, you know, is, and if that's their role, they fulfilled it well, is making it known to people, and not just within the UFO community, but I mean, I'm sure we all saw all the footage and coverage when that came out in the mainstream media, and it really moved the meter when it came to, you know, the ridicule factor and having something taken seriously. So even if that's all they accomplished, that in itself was a big thing.
Yeah, they've fired up some investigators I know have dug in and are getting more actively involved. And of course, they made it a little bit safer for witnesses to come out and start talking. And they've also made it a little safer, I think, for some people in the scientific community to get more actively involved. We saw that down in Alabama, I guess maybe a little bit more than a week ago. And some people are coming forward in that field, and they're talking a little bit more about UFOs a little bit more openly, and that's a good thing. I'm all for that. So they've done a good job. Again, if you judge the bottom line, like you were talking about, so far so good. We just want to know more.
It's open to dialogue in public. That's the good thing.
Mm-hmm. Huge. I mean, the New York Times article. What can you say about that? That's what else would you call disclosure? I'm not really waiting for the White House to go and make an announcement. It's the closest thing to disclosure that we've gotten, and probably the closest that we're going to get. And you have to give to the stars guys, some cred for being the ones that took that and ran with it and got that out into the public eye. Absolutely.
I wanted to share a little bit about who Jim Semivan is, because our listeners may not be familiar with him right away. He's the co-founder and vice president of operations for TTSA, which is the To the Stars Academy that Tom DeLonge founded. And he is also, he primarily worked as a consultant for the intelligence community on classified topics, including intelligence community leadership training, CIA tradecraft training, and IC programs, which is, intelligence community is what that stands for, IC programs for countering weapons of mass destruction. And Mr. Semivan retired from the CIA's Directorate of Operations after 25 years as an operations officer, both overseas and domestically. And then I wanted to just mention a little bit about Lou Elizondo. He's the Director of Global Security and Special Programs for To the Stars Academy. He is a career intelligence officer whose experience includes working with the U.S. Army, the Department of Defense, the National Counterintelligence Executive, the Director of National Intelligence, and so on. He's got quite a long resume there. He was a former special agent in charge, and he conducted and supervised highly sensitive espionage and terrorism investigations around the world. Was going to ask you all, how often do you think the world of ufology has anything to do with the world of terrorism? Anyone?
Not too often, I don't think.
Well, the reason I ask that is, I obviously a lot of these intelligence officers get involved undercover, I think goes without saying, undercover into these ufology groups looking for something. Well, it's not terrorism. That's what I believe. It's probably not. Then what is it? Would anybody like to chime in on what do they think the most obvious factors are regarding why a counterintelligence agent would want to get involved in ufology?
Well, maybe it's what Earl had commented on earlier, is that they view it as a threat. And if it's viewed as a threat, then you gather all the intelligence you can and see where it fits in that theory. So maybe it's simply just that. If they have information, or if they can learn information from ufology, or if it's going down a track that's harmful, that they feel is harmful or a threat, then maybe that's when they engage in the disinformation stuff to steer the conversation away from something that could be a threat to them. So I don't know,
right.
Just a supposition.
I think it has been discussed where a lot of the advanced tech, they're always developing the next generation of technology, newer planes, and all that. And I don't think there's too much doubt there's at least some crossover between UFO sightings and people seeing some of our more advanced tech before it gets into the public eye. So I think there might be some element of that in there. But again, I don't know that it really requires, again, trying to infiltrate private organizations and such and feed them disinformation.
Okay. Well, also, TTSA has a project called the Atom Project regarding finding out more about UAP fragments, anything anomalous related regarding metamaterials or exotic materials, unknown alloys. Exotic alloys are also called. Perhaps maybe they're also involved in the field of ufology, because if anybody finds out anything that could be used for technology, they want to be able to reverse engineer it and use it. How does anyone feel about that? Anyone want to jump in on that?
I'll take that. Knowing, at least having some idea of what the scientists on record as saying that they think they've got something interesting here that merits a closer look. And I'll name them again, going back in the day, Peter Sturrock, then more recently Jacques Vallée, Gary Nolan, and of course Hal Puthoff. So you've got 4 scientists on the record saying they're in possession of some fragments. They're probably not all the same fragments, but different fragments that they think are interesting for a variety of different reasons. One in particular is the isotopic ratios of the material. Another is the purity of certain fragments. Not every fragment has each of those characteristics, but that's what they're interested in. And obviously, if you can sort of engineer the isotopic ratios, at least there's some tremendous potential. Just giving you a real quick idea, enriching uranium is a method of manipulating the 235 isotope and kind of bumping it up relative to the 238 isotope in uranium, and as a result of that, you get nuclear weapons. So again, something very, very powerful there. So there's a lot of potential in that. And they're looking into it. I interviewed Gary Nolan maybe a little bit over a year ago now, and his feeling, at that point, didn't know what the usage was, didn't know really what to do with it. And a lot of times that happens. Something new will come down the pike, and it's amazing, it's fantastic, but nobody can figure out really a practical use for it. So you have to kind of figure the item out and then figure out what to do with it. And those are sometimes 2 different problems,
I also want to mention, I think part of the reason why the intelligence community is involved in the area of ufology is for a few reasons, pretty obvious stuff. And that is they will always try and be involved in any group in the U.S., period, because they do it for reasons of surveillance to collect data and see if the group is a threat to the government. Also, like I said, if they can find out if there's any new discoveries in any group that is involved, it touches on science or technology or medicine, anything like that, is of deep interest to them. Dr. Scott, I had a question for you. When I interviewed you, you were talking about how when you were employed by the Defense Intelligence Agency in PhD level, which is GS-11 research in satellite photography, you worked with some of the highest security clearances, which is above top secret in the government at that time. You worked in such divisions as the Air Order of Battle, which should have been a government monitoring point for UFO activity. Dr. Scott, I was going to ask you, what did you mean by that when you said that you worked for such divisions as the Air Order of Battle, which should have been a government monitoring point for UFO activity? What does that mean?
Well, what they did was, my job when I was in it was for a particular area of the Earth to identify any flying craft that was either on the ground or flying. And so that would be a good way to look for UFOs. But we didn't have a clearance for UFOs, and my supervisors reported a UFO, and and we had pretty good evidence that it existed and was there photographically, and we got debunked, which was very strange. We didn't have a clearance for UFOs, even though you'd think that if you're supposed to identify every flying object or things capable of flying, that there should be something for UFOs. And that gave me the impression that way up above at a higher security level or a different code word, that they'd probably are studying UFOs, and I imagine they are now because they would have the photography to do it.
That's interesting. There's a wonderful person by the name of Ada Severini, who I speak to off and on about ufology, and she actually was going through some old Project Blue Book files, which I had given her the link to find all of the Blue Book documents, and she poured over so much data for hours, and she actually found a document that indicated the U.S. Air Force had assigned had assigned officers to any UFO activity. So if there is a report to be had regarding UFO activity in the government, they would dispatch somebody from the Air Force, which was specific. They actually made a group just for that, to go do a report on that. Have you heard about that before, Dr. Scott?
Yeah, actually, another person and I were talking to a neighbor, and this was a neighbor I knew very well, who was well respected and everything in the neighborhood. And nobody had ever talked about UFOs to him, and somehow we asked him. And he said when he was in the Navy that he belonged to a real secret group, and he wouldn't give too much information about it, but that they were dispatched all over the world when he was a flyer, but when they were not specifically flying someplace, they flew to different places and collected UFO information and got it back to the government through this real weird way. They didn't just send it back to the government. They did some secret thing of sending it to one country, and then it goes to another country, and then it went to the government. And that was really surprising that he admitted that, and he said it was a real secret, and so I didn't give his name or anything. But I knew he was a reliable person, that the government is sending out, it was sending out people that collected UFO information.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating too. And Ada Severini spent hours and hours scouring the documents to find the information she had found. So in other words, she went through the Project Blue Book documents. Well, there's many years of them, but whatever she could at the time. And when she saw this interesting report, which I'm about to read to you all, it's very interesting and anecdotal, how the government chastises this person about their UFO report, and you'll see why. She lost it, and then she spent 4 to 6 hours looking for it again. So just to give her credit for that, I want to thank Ada for having found this. And the letter starts off as this: your recent letter to President Johnson concerning your sighting of an unidentified flying object has been referred to this office, meaning the Air Force. Unfortunately, you did not report your sighting soon enough so that a scientific investigation can be made. We have found after 30 days, precise details tend to become vague, and an investigation would serve little scientific or technical purpose. Should you ever sight another UFO, please report it as soon as possible to the nearest Air Force base. Each base in the United States government has a UFO investigator who is in a better position to make an on-the-spot investigation, which usually results in a more accurate analysis. We are, however, involving a copy of the latest Project Blue Book report. By reading it, you may be able to discover what it was that you observed. Sincerely, and they black out the name. Earl, what do you think about that report? Isn't that great?
Well, we know they've been interested in the phenomenon.
Yeah.
They've been interested in it for a long time.
Right.
It was affecting all the most, secretive, sensitive places in our country. I mean, for God's sake, the Roswell affair. I mean, we're right there where they were, working on where we sent the atomic bomb out from, and
Right.
And they're just obviously it's a security. They do see it as a security issue, and they should. I mean, talking earlier, I was saying that that I have some misgivings about the To the Stars guys thinking of this as a threat, our visitors, but you don't want them to think that it's not either. You hope that there's a balance in there. So, but what I find really interesting about the document you were just reading, Chant, is that, well, now apparently if you call up an Air Force base and you try to,
right.
tell them that you've seen a UFO, they'll refer you to MUFON, or maybe they refer you to the Stars Academy as well now. I don't know.
Right. Or they'll say they don't know what you're talking about, even though it's on their radar. I just love this letter because it's kind of like, hey, stupid, you should have reported it to us within 30 days.
Well, that's kind of your attitude too, Earl and Shane. You kind of want to pot off the presses, don't you?
Better.
Yeah.
We want to be able to go and jump on a good report as fast as we can, because people tend to gloss over the facts, and you want to get in there as soon as you can.
Not too long, about a year or two ago, I called the airport just to report a UFO to see what was, and they referred me to Bigelow.
Yep, they were doing that for a while.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Alexander hooked that up.
Okay. Well, there you go. Well, I like Bigelow. I don't know about you guys. I think he's an interesting guy.
Oh, I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep.
I had a question about whistleblowers and MUFON and the government. Dr. Scott, I was going to ask you, because you were on the board of MUFON from the 1990s to 2000s, on the board of directors. I wanted to ask you, did you ever come across a whistleblower regarding wanting to leak information from the government about UFOs, or any kind of whistleblower of any kind at all?